Welcome to the Link Online. Coming to you live on Facebook here on Fridays at 7:15 hours GMT or 1:15 on a very gloomy afternoon here in Eastern Canada. Hi, I'm Carmel Kilkenny here with Terry Haig.
Hi, Carm.
Lynn Desjardins, as
Hello.
always. And on keyboards and social media, there's Marie-Claude Simard, oui. And on the other controls out there, our sound technician today, the lovely Chantal Saint-Sauveur. Merci, Lynn. It's all coming to me. And Pierre, of course, Pierre Dutil is back there watching over things. Now, coming up in this half hour, Lynn.
I'll tell you about Canadian universities, which are hiring more temporary and part-time faculty instead of tenured professors.
And I've done a story about the ending of a tradition out west, Greyhound bus travel.
And Mark left us a story about the new report on the steep decline of species all around the world. We'll have those stories and a few more things to chat about coming up on this edition of The Link Online. So there was a time when the job of a university professor in Canada was well paid and secure, but that's been changing over the last 10 years. Lynn, what did you learn?
Well, a new study, Carmel, suggests that more than half of all faculty appointments at publicly funded Canadian universities are on contract. They are not tenured. A study for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives found that part-time work accounted for nearly 80% of all contract appointments in 2016 to 2017. I spoke with Chandra Pasma. She's a senior researcher at the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and she was the co-author of this report. And she says the hiring of so many temporary and contract professors is unfair to them and unfair to the students.
A significant effect, and not because contract faculty aren't excellent teachers. They generally are, but the conditions that they're being forced to work in make it hard for them to deliver the highest quality education. In many cases, they don't get the same institutional support and resources that permanent faculty get, so they have to spend hours of their own time working for free to stay current in the research on their field. They don't always get an office on campus or access to the university library, so it can be difficult to meet with students. In some cases, they don't get very much notice that they're going to teach a class, so it can be as little as 2 to 3 weeks or even 2 to 3 days, which makes it really hard for them to stay on top of the most current research in the field and make sure that students have access to the latest resources like the most recent textbooks. But we also know that students do better when they're able to develop relationships with faculty, and that's really hard in the case of contract faculty. They're just not around on campus as much, whether it's because they have to leave right after class for another job at another local university or at a local restaurant working as a server, or whether it's because they don't have office space and they're forced to meet with students in a crowded public place. It's hard to develop that mentoring relationship and to give students adequate feedback on their performance in class.
Why are Canadian universities hiring so many contract professors?
What we discovered in this research is that a lot of the excuses that you commonly hear, that this is the result of the personal choices of professors, or it's a response to the market conditions and changing patterns in enrollment and demand, they really don't hold water. The data really suggests that this mostly has to do with the institutional choices. What we found is that universities in the same province, so receiving funding based on the same provincial model, in the similar market of similar size, have vastly different rates of contract faculty. So that suggests it's really coming down to the individual choices made by administrations at the different universities. We don't know why that is, but it probably has something to do with the fact that contract faculty are so much cheaper than permanent tenured faculty. And of course, it's a different approach to labor relations because you don't need to fire them. You just simply don't offer them a new contract.
What are the recommendations for improving this situation?
We recommend more adequate and sustained public funding to reduce the incentive for universities to cut costs by relying on contract faculty. But we also need to demand that universities do better. It's simply not fair to staff, and it's not fair to students to have this be such a predominant hiring model for universities. We need to expect that universities offer more secure positions with better wages, And if they're not prepared to do that on their own, then it's time for the government to start using the levers that it has, whether it's attaching conditions to public funding or using legislation to create labor protections like ensuring that two people doing the same job receive the same pay instead of one person receiving half the amount of pay because they're on contract.
So, Asma says this research is really the first to comprehensively look at the use of contract positions at Canadian universities. And she hopes that people and governments take notice of its finding that more than half of all faculty appointments are contract and not tenured in Canada.
Yeah, very interesting story, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the World Wildlife Fund released its annual report called the Living Planet Report 2018. It's a rather dire study of the conditions of species around the world, noting that vertebrates have declined by 60%, and we're also very quickly losing marine species and plants. Many scientists around the world are sounding the alarm, saying we're now experiencing the 6th mass extinction of species in the Earth's history. The scientists and the WWF say it's due to human activities such as those causing climate change. James Snyder is Vice President of Science, Research and Innovation for WWF Canada. In this excerpt of his conversation with Mark Montgomery, he begins with an explanation of how this report differs from past reports.
I think the most significant result of the Living Planet Report 2018 is the trend is going in the wrong direction. As you said, this is the 12th biennial report from WWF on the status of the world's wildlife population, and this year the result is a 60% decline on average on our vertebrate species around the world since 1970. 60% in less than 50 years. And I think increasingly there's a sense that we're at this precipice, this tipping point. At 60%, the time for action is now. And the flip side to it, of course, is the driver of this biodiversity loss, this wildlife loss, is our own human activity. We as humans are the central part of this equation. And so figuring out what to do for wildlife means that we have to look at ourselves in terms of how we're using resources and in terms of how we're consuming resources and how we're living in this day and age.
Is it possible, Mr. Snyder, that we're just too urbanized, too far away from nature to realize the effect that we're having on nature? For example, most of the world's population will go into a supermarket or another kind of market, and there'll be fish there every day, but we don't realize that we're, for example, slowly wiping out all the fish in the ocean kind of thing.
Sure. I think there is a disconnect, if you will, from a growing urban environment where people live and people are congregating and nature. But certainly here in Canada, many of our species at risk are in the southern part of the country, in those same places where most of our populations live.
Now, this report has come out highlighting some very serious numbers, as you've pointed out, and yet just today as well, we've heard that China is opening up once again their market to rhino parts and tiger parts, albeit theoretically farmed. But surely that would have an extremely serious effect on animals in the wild.
Yes, there's a great concern internationally in terms of this policy decision related to the trading of ivory and more broadly in terms of wildlife trafficking. Around the world, that is a major concern in terms of a direct cause of loss of wildlife populations. And certainly when we look at tigers and rhinos, this policy decision, I think, is greatly concerning for many of us in the environmental community as a step in the wrong direction.
Scientists have said we're experiencing the 6th mass extinction on Earth. Is this simply underlining that assumption?
I think that's very true, and this is a really important point, which is to say mass extinctions events are rare on geological timescales over hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, some might even say. Today, in the last 50 years, we have stood by, essentially, as we've seen the catastrophic loss of the world's biodiversity. I think we really, truly are at a moment where we have to begin to take, actions at a level vastly greater than what we've done to date.
And that was James Snyder, Vice President of Science Research for the WWF Canada. That's the World Wildlife Federation, or the World Wildlife Fund, rather. And he was speaking with Mark Montgomery. If you'd like to hear the full interview, it's in our highlights section. I was waiting for that punch. Wasn't there. So it was the end of an era this week in Western Canada. On Wednesday, the last Greyhound bus made its final run across the prairies in British Columbia, leaving just one route, and that's the one that goes south from Vancouver to Seattle in the United States. Terry, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I make that it's kind of sad. I mean, Greyhound buses are subject to songs, romance, people following their dreams. My all-time favorite movie one of them is Midnight Cowboy, and it starts out with that long bus ride with Tex coming in from Texas, Joe coming in from Texas, whatever. But they're just not making money anymore. Since 2010. Ridership has fallen by 41%.
This is in Canada?
In Canada, in Western Canada.
Interesting, 41%.
Yeah. So, in fact, I got a hold of my old friend Bruce Dobigan, our old friend Bruce Dobigan, who lives in Calgary now, and asked him how this came to be.
You know, when people come to visit the west of Canada and the United States for that matter, but in particular they come from somewhere else, and they've never been before. The thing that always amazes them is the distances, the vastness of going hour after hour after hour of the prairies or of the forests. It's a nation of vast distances, and the ways that we got around and we bound a country together were highways and railways, and they were the reason that we were able to tie all this stuff together, keep it from going American, etc. And that vastness is, one of the reasons why people have a romantic notion about the bus services, the Greyhounds and people like that, who made it possible to go and see Uncle Fester.
Uncle Lester. Well, no, that would be now.
Possibly, 12 hours away in Winnipeg, and you just hop on the bus in Saskatchewan, and that's how you got there. So it is definitely the end of an era for a lot of people.
I wonder what happens now. I mean, this is just more atomization, it seems.
Well, I mean, one of the narratives of North America that's been ongoing. I mean, we don't necessarily talk about it all that much. We're too busy talking about other things to do with Mr. Trump or Mr. Trudeau. But one of the big things that's happened, of course, is the sort of the migration of people from the country to the cities, the death of the small town, the death of the small town store. All of those things, they're disappearing. And while they were still vibrant, while they were still vital, you needed Greyhound to get you people from place to place. But today, if you grow up in one of those towns, you're a young person, you have any ambition, you leave. You go somewhere else. You hop on one of those buses and you go somewhere else. And now the need to have a regular bus service is gone. I mean, we used Greyhound when I first moved to Calgary. It's been 20 years since I moved west. We used to use Greyhound to ship stuff. Their parcel post was pretty good, and they had great rates to ship stuff, and we used it a lot. My son used to go to the University of Lethbridge, and we put him on the bus. It was like about a 3-hour drive down to Lethbridge. But all of those things, that migration to the big cities from the small places has changed the equation, and Greyhound is paying the price. But now what I hear is that there are certain indigenous communities that maybe they're flush with capital, I'm not sure, that are talking about maybe reviving bus transportation in the West. But the problem is you have to subsidize it because there are certain routes. If you're doing Prince Albert to I don't know, the Cypress Hills for some reason, if you're trying to do that, there's just no profit motive in it. So if the government wants to have that sort of stuff alive, you've got to subsidize it, or have somebody who doesn't mind losing money. And some of the indigenous communities right now, with the casino revenues, the oil revenues that they're getting, they may feel they're flush enough to do that. That
was part of my interview with Bruce Dobigan. Demise of Greyhound buses. Just for some perspective here, Greyhound, you guys, had 360 stops in Western Canada. For 300 of them, it was the only service.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I understand that a lot of those routes have been filled, that local entrepreneurs have
taken flyers. A lot of Aboriginals will see. And the day after, on Thursday, Mark Garneau, the Minister of Transport in Canada, said, well, we're going to do something about it. We're going to... He didn't announce how much money it was, but we're talking to the provinces, and the federal government seems to understand that it is for those 41 ridership has dropped by 41%. Still leaves a lot of people that rely on Greyhound to
public
get
transit.
That's it. It's public transit. Very good, Carmen.
I was surprised, Lynn. You were in that part of Ontario this summer, Collingwood, along Georgian Bay. Collingwood's a growing town, because in actual fact, in parts of Ontario, there's a great move out of the big city of Toronto to these smaller satellite cities around Kingston, Collingwood, London, Ontario. There's no bus service to get into Toronto. I thought, so everybody's dependent on a car. That's it. You have a car?
Some places have the GO train, but it's complicated because
it doesn't
go all the way out there. Well, and increasingly too, people who are retiring are selling their high-priced homes in the big cities and moving to smaller communities, which are actually marketing specifically to seniors and offering complexes that have services specifically for seniors. And, you get to a certain age and they take your driver's license away. So if you can't get around by car, well, how do you go visit the kids?
I was taking the glass half full approach, thinking it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for so many people. It's an opportunity. There's an opportunity in Collingwood. There's opportunities all over Western Canada. But I guess the government's waiting to see where the routes are really needed.
But that's what Bruce said in your interview. Is the problem is that the spaces in Canada, the distances are so huge. They are huge. People have no idea until they come here. I mean, you can look at a map and see. I mean, it's
5 days to cross the country.
Yeah, 8,000 kilometers from sea to sea, isn't it? Mm-hmm. 5,000 miles, 8,000 kilometers. So, your nephew or your grandchild could be living 2,000 kilometers away. Mm-hmm. So,
we still have Greyhound here in Eastern Canada.
Yeah.
So, if you're nostalgic, you can.
But here's the thing about buses, and somebody made this point: it's not like if you have a pack of razor blades in stock in your store, you can hold on to them until somebody buys them. Whereas the bus has to leave half empty. It's not like you can wait around until you get what's required to pay for the trip.
Yeah, then I guess that's where some of these smaller entrepreneurs with smaller vehicles.
Well, we're going to see. They're taking a shot.
It will be interesting.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to talk about the fall foliage.
Yes. This week, Mark left me 2 short videos that he took himself a few weeks ago when the leaves were at their best. And I thought I would, we were planning to show them to you. Personally, I missed the leaves this year. I don't know if you guys saw beautiful scenery.
Sometimes it happens right around Thanksgiving weekend when we're all busy cooking and having family over. In my case, it's also my daughter's birthday. So that's another event that I take care of. And like you, I missed it. And I'm so angry. And when I missed it, I said, well, I have to put it in my agenda next year. And it's where we are, in the Montreal region and north and south of there, it's really usually the first weekend in October.
Well, it's actually never quite the same. No. So, because sometimes, in Thanksgiving, you can see them. Sometimes it's all green at Thanksgiving, so you can't actually use
it depends on when Thanksgiving, because the first Monday vacillates a little bit.
And it's also very hard to gauge.
Beautiful.
It's very hard to gauge, I was going to say, because when you're in the city, if you wait until the leaves have changed in the city, it's already too late outside of the city, because the temperatures are warmer here and the leaves change later here. So if you wait and you go, say, north of Montreal, you've already missed it. You could go south of Montreal. Yeah. And actually, for when I retire, my goal is to start in the north and as the weeks go, travel south and follow
There's actually an interactive map. I'm going to start showing the video.
Yes, this is Ontario,
what a beautiful lake.
This is,
Ontario near Kingston.
Near Kingston.
Near the Thousand Islands.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very simple.
So you get the colors and they get reflected in the lake. It's particularly beautiful.
And when the lake is so tranquil, calm. It's just so beautiful.
It's like a mirror, yes.
It looks like it's maybe the end of the day with a yellowish kind of light.
There's some of the red. The red's spectacular. I have my favorite trees in the city, the ones that go red.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, boy.
I know. There's trees we love, and we just go back to them.
It reminds me, too, of when we were little. We used to collect those leaves, and then we'd iron them between sheets of wax paper, and they'd kind of get waxy, and you could save them in your book or something.
Yeah, I still do that.
There was a project.
Yeah, and I have projects I want to do, but I never get to.
Leaf collections.
Yeah. So that's one. And also, there's, let me just switch the cameras here.
Just for the record, I spent 9.5 hours raking leaves.
Oh,
that's the
I have still to do it. So
now apparently it's bad to rake them. But the thing is, I got pine needles, so I had to get the leaves are on top of the pine needles, so you got to get the pine needles out because it'll kill your grass.
Yeah, but remember how fun it was when you were a kid to jump in the leaves.
Yeah,
that was the funnest.
remember that?
Kid,
I still remember the smell.
I
of
could
the
still
leaves.
do it.
Oh no, it's wonderful. No, but raking for 9.5 hours.
Yeah,
How many bags did you fill?
Now,
Lots. I didn't keep count.
Oh my goodness, I definitely count them.
Really?
Yeah. I used to put out 20, 25 bags. We used to have a big maple in the backyard, and then there was, holes in the trunk, so it had to come down, which was a very sad day. But boy, did we have to rake and fill bags one after another.
I realized that it's almost easier to rake them in the spring.
Yes, when they're a little more crinkly.
Yeah, but your grass died. No, but the thing is that this report just said that don't rake your leaves. I just saw that because it's critters live off them.
And what do you do with
like
them?
our pumpkins, when we put the pumpkins out after Halloween. But if you go out into the forest and you go for one of those hikes or walks, there's all the leaves. Nobody's doing anything with them.
And they're the critters.
Yeah, but the problem is people want grass. They don't want forest floor on their front lawn.
No, but it's the pine needles that are killers. Vicious pine needles.
Yes, they are.
Bad pine needles.
So let's see the other video you
the
have
video
there.
is more a sound video, although the sound is not perfect. But it's about the beautiful sound of geese flying.
Oh,
Don't get me started with the geese.
What? So that's. Oops, sorry, I have to show this to the people now.
Bye-bye.
So that sound you're hearing is a huge flock of Canada geese flying south for the winter.
See the chevrons?
And when you hear that sound in the spring, you're very happy. When you hear it in the fall, you're kind of sad because, winter's coming.
Get lost, you losers.
Yeah, they make a mess.
What's wrong with you?
Oh, they make a mess. I did paths where there's Canada geese. They just mess up the whole thing. No.
They have a huge problem on Toronto's island and the lakeshore.
The waterfront.
With planes, you mean?
With the geese.
Oh. No, with the geese.
With the geese.
Messing.
First of all, they mess everything up, but they're also very dangerous when
jet engines, right?
Well, they're very aggressive, and if the female geese are having the
babies,
goslings, the males will take your ankles out, basically. They'll just charge at you because they're protecting them. So when people are on these places with little kids, the geese are taller than the little kids. They're high when they're standing around, walking around on the ground.
Huh.
So
yeah, that can be a bit dangerous in the spring.
Yeah, we kind of took their place, though, right?
That's true.
I suppose so.
They were here first.
Have it all. We could have some lakeshore and some park.
I've always said that.
Because I just love the sound. When I hear it, I always run outside and try to see them. But
I actually heard them at night once. I thought that was really neat. You look up and you can't see.
Yeah, flying in the middle of the night.
How did they decide to take off then? And they're all talking to each other. Yeah,
and you'd think they'd want to save that energy for flying instead of yakking.
Now, I have another video to show you since we seem to have time. Lynn did a story today about a viral video. I'm going to start showing it
Okay, and I'll narrate.
I love these creatures.
Maurice Lamotte and Nicole Leblanc were driving in northern Ontario when they came upon this white moose and her calf. Now, neither of them had seen one before, although Lamotte is a hunter, and he's often out in the wilderness. So the sighting occurred just 15 minutes from the town of Folliette. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right there. And that area is considered a hotbed for white moose sightings. The animals do exist right across Canada, but they're very rare and rarely seen. And apparently they occur most often in an isolated population of moose where the recessive gene for that white coloring is more likely to be passed on. So Leblanc took the video of the moose, he posted it on Facebook, and as of October 20th, there had been 1.4 5 million.
Yeah, and yesterday
views.
I checked, it was 4.5 million.
Wow.
Yeah, and probably
10
over
days.
5. Yeah.
They are beautiful creatures, aren't they?
Look at that.
Yeah, and yeah. Go
It's
ahead.
coming back. It's so amazing that it's actually coming back toward the camera.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of
Not
surprising.
shy. Well, they're bigger
Yeah.
than we are. And there's a real problem with the moose because of climate change. Apparently, the ticks, they get onto the moose and they suck their blood. And, usually it's a problem for the moose, but usually they can survive because as soon as the very, very cold weather comes, it can kill the ticks. But because the winters are now shorter, more ticks are surviving, and apparently they can suck the blood right out of the moose calves and kill them.
Wow,
So
amazing.
apparently this is one of the effects
So we go
of
back to the
climate
World
change.
Wildlife Fund.
Yes, yeah. One more
Another
effect
species
of,
in danger.
Yeah.
Nice
Yeah.
upbeat story, Lynn. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Actually, you're the one who did the story about the two moose fighting, that other viral.
That's another video you should check out. The RCI website and just ask Mr. Google to show you moose.
Yeah.
And that was, I believe that one was in New Brunswick. Now,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a province that has a lot of moose. In fact, I drove through there to go on a trip to Prince Edward Island. So you have to, from Montreal, you have to drive right through the province of New Brunswick.
Exactly.
Huge. It took us, the whole trip was 12 hours, I think, from Montreal to PEI. But as you're going through the province of New Brunswick, there are signs everywhere on the side of the highway telling you to be careful of moose.
Yeah.
Well, the
Because they
train, the national train that goes to Halifax, if there's a moose on the tracks, that's it. You just sit and wait, and the moose takes its sweet time trotting along, and the train just...
Does it happen regularly?
It happens often.
Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, there's a huge...
What I was shocked when I saw a moose live, though, is they're moose.
How big they
so
are?
but how big they are, but how skinny their legs are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this
I
is a
think they're
real
like
problem.
our elephants, except that they have skinny legs.
Yeah, but the real problem is if you hit one on the highway, because they have these tall, skinny legs, they are right at the level of your windshield, and they will come right through the
Yeah.
windshield
And people
kill
are
you.
killed. Yeah.
People regularly die from...
Yeah, so I
yeah.
think they suggest that you divert your car.
Oh, yeah,
rather
if you
than
see a moose,
and
you
you
want
can't do anything. But instead of thinking, oh, well, I guess I'll just...
No. You never want to hit a moose.
No.
You just don't. And actually, I'm so nervous about this that I do not drive on those highways at dusk because there are regular places on the Trans-Canada Highway where you have to be careful of moose. One of them being between Montreal and Ottawa.
Or between Montreal and Toronto.
Yeah.
We saw a
correct.
deer come out
Yeah.
into the concrete median, and then it left. Then it ran back. But
Yeah.
Oh,
this was all
my
in a
God.
split
Yeah.
second. So
Well, and some places it's such a problem. For example, I was driving up to Saguenay, like Saint-Jean, which
what
is
a
an
beautiful
area.
drive that is.
It
oh
is.
my goodness.
But they have put fencing in on the side of the highway for long stretches of that highway because there were just so many accidents.
We've done stories on this in the past where
Yep.
they've done, out west, they've done projects where they put the fences along and then they build little bridges
Yeah.
so the animals can cross underneath.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
what
just
they've done to
before we
Mount
go-
Royal. We've got all these little passages up there now on
So
the
what's
mountain.
happening with Montreal?
It's open again.
It's
It's
open
open?
again
Yes.
as of, but it looks
Okay.
like South Jersey. I'm telling you. I mean,
Oh.
no, really, they got these
Whatever
jerry-built
that means.
pathways. It's South New Jersey. You go
We're
there,
talking about a
we're
really
not talking
beautiful
about Cape
park
May,
in the middle of Montreal.
in the middle of Montreal, which we have, which they shut down all summer. It's the most beautiful drive in the city, and
But all the cyclists were very happy about it.
all the cyclists. If
Yeah.
you read Josh Freed's column, there's very few cyclists that can go up.
Is that so? Oh, because you can't ride
Yeah,
all
the
the way up.
road
It's
is
too
easy. You
steep.
go up the
Yes.
dirt road.
Yeah,
You don't go
have
up the
to walk
main
up with your
road.
bike. All right, so that brings us to the
And
end of the
furthermore,
program.
if elected.
What do you got planned for the weekend?
I got to
good.
get lead pipes moved, changed.
Oh.
Lead pipes, the city changed lead pipes, and they're not good for you, so I got to change mine.
Oh my God.
Yeah, big job.
Terry?
Well, I've got to drive down what you guys are talking about, but I'll be on my game, boy, after this.
You'll
I
take
got to
the-
drive down to Kingston, Ontario tomorrow.
Thousand Island Parkway.
Thousand
For all of
Island
you.
Parkway.
I don't know.
Right,
We're going to see lots of friends this weekend. I have things planned for Saturday and Sunday.
And
I
you?
have no plans yet, but I'm looking forward to
Raking
looking out the
leaves?
window. Tomorrow's going to be drizzly and awful.
Oh,
but
don't forget the clock goes back.
Sunday will be good.
Get an
Yeah.
extra hour of
That's what I wanted to
sleep.
say.
Change.
Don't forget to change your time, people from Canada here, or from Quebec anyway.
We'll be fresh and lively next week. Thank you for joining us, and we hope Mark Montgomery's having a great weekend. See you all next week. Bye-bye.